While West Virginia's victory over Kansas State is Neal Brown's biggest win as WVU head coach, and it is by far, this now is the time for Neal Brown to really prove that this era of WVU football is different than the last. That he now is going to put his stamp on this program and that it is headed in the right direction. I'm your host here, Mike Asti, and this is Mic Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, WV Sports Now. And I think this goes without saying. It's hard to debate this. Neal Brown's win over Kansas State, an improbable victory, really. I didn't predict it to happen. Many didn't think it was going to happen. Kansas State, number 16 in the country, headed into the game. The Mountaineers entering the game basically the worst way you can, incredibly down. Criticism being there around the program, and criticism a little bit around Neal Brown. That hasn't really happened since he became head coach at WVU. They gave him a mulligan from last year. Most people did. It was called year zero by myself and some colleagues, and even WVU fans, really, to be reasonable. The cover was kind of bare. This year, been a roller coaster ride, of course, and that loss to Texas Tech, not good. Certainly a bad loss and a stain on his resume early on in a year that was supposed to be better than last, regardless of the pandemic and everything else, even though he's still getting time to fix things. But having his back in the offseason with everything going on with Vic Koenig and having him make that decision and having Shane Lyons be in lockstep with him in that decision that he made, the university, the fans, everyone seems to love the guy. I certainly feel like he's a fit there and certainly been friendly with media. So he's given tons of room. He's given a long leash here as the Mountaineers head coach. And sometimes, even in major programs, you don't get that many years. But Neal Brown's going to get time. He is. This is his second year, really, even though, again, last year being called year zero. But he's given time. The thing is, though, the Mountaineers get the win. So this past week, headed into that game, it was awful. Neal Brown facing a little criticism for the first time really ever, a little unsure of the program's future, could certainly be an opinion of some fans and media at that time, just because we've seen this fish before. This was Dana Holgorsen. Dana Holgorsen starting things off in that tenure, a big Orange Bowl victory, major bowl game victory over Clemson, who then would start a dynasty not too long in the future after that, as we're seeing now what's become of that Clemson program. 70 points, whopping Clemson, Fetty whopping them all up and down the field. And then eventually you see big wins, of course, but you also see those bad losses that kind of ruined and stained that tenure of Dana Holgorsen. And that year, that tenure, those years didn't become more than they could have been or more than they were because those bad losses would exist with those big wins that were there. That horns down as we're going actually into Texas week, so this is fitting. Horns down, that victory with Wilger late in that game over Texas, a big win. Certainly one of the bigger wins of this millennium, really, for the WVU program, but it doesn't mean as much as some of the other big wins because the season would then get puttered away after that. And that's kind of the Dana Holgorsen mantra, or at least it was at WVU. Same old story, maybe some people were thinking with Neal Brown. Yes, you're going to give him time. Yes, it's his first major job after coming from Troy and having success there. Yes, he had to rebuild last year. Yes, he still needs to get his recruits in there. But again, that Texas Tech loss should never have happened. That's a Texas Tech team that's not ranked like WVU. It's a worse team than WVU, you would figure. It's a team that struggled most of this season with the exception of a game against Texas where all those points were scored. So we'll see coming in to this weekend, of course. But the way that game went, should not have lost that game. Should not have been a loss. And honestly, didn't play that well against Kansas despite the win. Eventually covering the spread, but that first half, it looked like WVU might have got upset by the Kansas Jayhawks who haven't won a game as we're speaking. So, yeah, you 4-2 right now as we're speaking, and that includes one win out of conference before they got into this Big 12 conference play. So that's not, that legit of a victory. And you're still waiting to see what this program will be in the future. This year, if you get 6-7 wins, it's certainly a step above last year. Certainly is. But I think fans thought maybe more could be there. And I'm sure fans are going to say, with all the chaos going around the Big 12, that if this team would win out, if this team would perform better, we shouldn't have lost that game with Texas Tech. Granted, there's chaos all over the place. Maybe this will be the year that won't be in your mind. Of course, the pandemic being involved there as well. So again, here, to make this clear, my point in this little brief show I wanted to put up there for you, to give my little, I guess, takes here outside of post-game shows. Of course, the Mic Drop Show does kind of suffer with a lot of our in-season coverage around the Now Network, and certainly what I offer here throughout several sites with my broadcast and host abilities and coverage in general. But I wanted to offer this. I wanted to step back on. I wanted to drop the mic here for WVU Sports Now, because this is clear. Again, Neal Brown's win, West Virginia's win over Kansas State, over number 16 Kansas State, a big win. And again, a big win because it's coming off of how bad the week earlier was and how much uncertainty around the program that there was. And maybe, okay, well, maybe we're not better than a season ago. Maybe we're not taking that step forward. Maybe Neal Brown's going to be similar to Dana Holgorsen in terms of big wins and also bad losses. And that's going to be the mindset now if they don't continue things on. If Neal Brown does not continue this season on with some other big wins and not that many bad losses, I'm not saying this team's going to go undefeated and win out necessarily. Again, this is still a rebuilding process. There are still holes there that you hope maybe aren't going to be there as evident next season, even though there's tons of progression with the offensive line being way better, certainly better quarterback play, despite still questions around Jared Tagey, who struggled against Texas Tech in his homecoming, but of course not against Kansas State. Lady Brown's emergent, big, finally a running game that was not there at all last year. The defense playing really well this year, again, with the exception of the Texas Tech game. Number one defense in the country for a while this season. Last year, better than maybe some thought or is advertised, but certainly not ever number one in the country. So this has been a well-improved team overall, but it still makes you wonder, scratch your head again, that, okay, if that's all true, how do you lose to Texas Tech? How do you let a season be ruined with this big win and then still remember that bad loss against the Red Raiders? So to forget that loss, to have that loss not make you think this is Dana Holgorsen all over again, and I've seen this fish before, the wins need to come. The wins need to pile up. Texas, TCU. TCU can't be a loss. You can't go ahead and say beat the Longhorns and then lose to TCU. TCU is getting beaten up all around in this conference. They're one of the few teams that are getting beaten up here in the Big 12. Again, Oklahoma's a down year. I'm not saying you got to beat the Sooners, but that would be great. This would be the year to beat them if you're ever going to do it. That would give confidence to the future of the program. But even if you lose to Oklahoma because tons of talent is still there, and even if, say, you lose to Iowa State because they're a ranked team, even though that's a team that's beat you before and that's a team you want revenge for, maybe this would be the year to finally beat them. See, again, it's not the end of the world if you lose those games. Those are quality teams, or at least quality programs. Losing to TCU, that would be bad. That would be like Texas Tech. That would be a problem. That would make your brain go to, is this Dana Holgorsen again? Have we seen this fish before? So if you're going to get big wins, and Kansas State's the biggest win Neal Brown's had as the WVU head coach, you can't then follow it up since it's already been preceded by a really bad loss. And I'm not saying Texas would be, but TCU certainly would be. Oklahoma, Iowa State, those are respectable games at least. That TCU game can't be the issue. But I will say for the Mountaineers, that's a big win, that win over Kansas State. That's a bad loss over Texas Tech. That's been the season to this point. That's how you can gauge this team. They haven't really played anybody that great. They lose to who they were supposed to lose to in Oklahoma State. They get wins over Kansas and Baylor, teams they're supposed to beat. And then, of course, the out-of-conference game to open up the season. Again, against the Kentucky directional, certainly makes you wonder whether that's that legitimate, and certainly should have been and was a guaranteed victory for the program. They were able to run up and down the field in that game. But the Texas Tech loss, it's bad. The Kansas State win, it's not only good, it's great, especially what went on entering that game, and to have your team up for that game, to have your quarterback knocked down after losing his homecoming, everything that went into that game That's on the coach. The coach is getting credit there, but he also guaranteed after last year's miserable season that he would turn things around and get the program back to glory. Again, this is a historic program despite the national titles not being there. So he does have pressure to do that. It is too early on. It is year one. If last year was kind of year zero, in reality, this, of course, is year two. The recruits are coming. More can maybe be expected next season. Maybe we'll be in a very better situation in terms of the pandemic as well, and a full, legit off season that, regardless of a pandemic, dealt with tons of controversy as well, with the defense losing their main coach and their coordinator that they haven't really still replaced. But again, the big wins have been there for this program throughout history, throughout recent memory. The bad losses have also been there too. That's why it's almost heaven, West Virginia. For West Virginia University to ever be heaven, the bad losses can't keep being there. They can't keep derailing great wins and let the wheels fall off overall seasons because of that one bad loss. You don't have that many mulligans when you're a program like WVU in this college football system. So for Neal Brown to show he's turned the corner, he's different than his predecessor, he's different than eras of the past, he needs to make sure those bad losses are not outweighing the big wins, and you don't cancel out the big wins with bad losses. And we'll see the rest of the season. Again, I'm Mike Asti. This was my dropping of the mic, my mic drop here for Pittsburgh Sports Live and WV Sports Now. I want to make sure you hit up the family of networks here throughout the Pittsburgh Sports Now family. Of course, PSN, the mothership. Of course, WV Sports Now, also Steelers Now, Pittsburgh Hockey Now, Pittsburgh Golf Now. We expanded all of it over there, folks. Pittsburgh Soccer Now, of course, as we certainly are covering it all here, pandemic or not. And, of course, pghsportslive.com for these videos can live in archive infamy or eternity or whatever word you want to use. Again, at WV Sports Now on Twitter, at PGH Sports Live on Twitter, and bottom of the video, easy to do. Click on the subscribe button, bottom of the video. It helps us get our content to you. It helps you get notification when this content happens, whether we go live, whether we upload, no matter what it is. And at Mike Asti 11 to find me on Twitter. Feel free to engage with me intelligently. Feel free to not engage with me. You can't be intelligent and you can't act sane. Don't act a fool there, but nonetheless, at Mike Asti 11 is where you can find me. So just in summary, Neal Brown, big win, biggest win he's had as WVU head coach, gives you reason to feel good about this program. Finally turning in the right direction. Forget about that Texas Tech loss. Things happen. But I can say things happen right now as long as they don't keep on coming. And to show you're different than your predecessor and different than what people think about almost heaven, West Virginia, for it ever to be heaven, those bad losses can't keep outweighing the great wins. In fact, they can't keep popping up. Lose to the teams that are good. Okay, no one's saying you got to be undefeated. That's fine. But don't add and sprinkle those bad losses against teams that you're flat out better than.